In 1884, John Singer Sargent painted this portrait. Today, a painting of this sort would probably not draw that much attention, but in the 19th century, this painting was, to say the least, scandalous. The Salon started in 1667 and was essentially the world's epicenter for painters, sculptors, and other artists in the Western world. It was essentially a convention for artists. And in 1884, the Salon was held in Paris. John Singer Sargent showed his portrait of Madame X, but it was not the same portrait that you're seeing here. Sargent originally painted his subject, Virginie Gautreau, as having one strap of her dress off her shoulder. And if you think back to the time period, I'm sure you can guess what happened next. The public's reaction was catastrophic, tainting both Sargent's career and the life of the subject, Virginie Gautreau. Sargent was panned for his quote-unquote provocativity. Meanwhile, Gautreau was shamed for her appearance in it. The way she posed, the fact that her dress was slipping off. All of Paris was getting in on her degradation at the time. So Sargent, in an attempt to save face, ended up adjusting the painting to meet the criticism that he got. He pulled that strap back up on her shoulder and forever altered his portrait of Madame X in the name of moderation. I tell you all this story not to talk about censorship, but to focus on the intention of an artist, and more importantly, their direction. I think in the modern day, it's easy to see these portraits of presidents and other people as sort of just these two-dimensional, artless pieces that just portray what was directly in front of whichever painter painted the portrait. But that's just not true. In the portrait of Madame X, Gautreau's dress was not just slipping down, and her stance was not like what you see in the portrait naturally, nor was the light naturally arranged in the way that it is. Sargent directed his subject and the elements around her, and this sense of direction is kind of what sets Sargent apart. Sargent's portraits are so interesting because of how he chooses to adjust the smallest details of his subjects and the way that he stylizes them. His portraits are not just representations of pure reality. He used light and manipulated faces and used exaggerated or muted colors to portray a sense of emotion and meaning rather than a perfected, idealized version of his subject. He treats it as if it's a performance. Sargent was by all means a director, and I think that Sargent's obsession with the face is something that has been carried down centuries into the medium of film, a medium in which one of the biggest directors today seems to be painting his own portraits.
Visions are clear.
Interviews during the releases of Dune Part 1 and Part 2 share a sort of common thread, which is Denis Villeneuve's constant push to make the world of Dune feel real.
The way we approach the sound in the movie, it's like if we had brought the documentary team into the world of Arrakis, that with a boom guy that will try to capture the sound, not trying to impress the audience, but more to feel that they are there.
So with all of those technicalities and just the beauty of Dune Part 1, when I watched Dune Part 2, I had the highest of expectations for the cinematography. Beyond the obvious fact that Greg Fraser, the DP of this movie, is maybe the most in-demand cinematographer today, I was also seeing so many Twitter threads that had stills of these incredibly grand, huge shots that showed me a sense of scale that I was so excited to experience. And it's safe to say that all that delivered. But to my surprise, my favorite shots in this movie weren't this one, or this one, or this one. They were shots like these. They were close-ups. They were portraits. And coming out of the theater, I think I realized that an aspect of Villeneuve's and Fraser's visual methodology that is not focused on enough is this usage of close-ups on faces. Just take a look at this shot here from the beginning of the movie. The lack of busyness in the frame sort of isolates the Emperor and allows us to wallow in his turmoil. This shot specifically, which is the first what I'm calling portrait of the film, incorporates an unwavering sense of stillness. It lingers on the Emperor's gaze, where the events of the previous film, which are being sort of recapped right now, causes his eyes to glaze over and he stares blankly into space. This shot is almost hypnotic, with the swirly bokeh in the background, giving it a sort of mesmerizing quality that draws us into the center of the frame where the Emperor is obviously expressing his emotions. The simplicity of the shot is what allows the performance to shine. And moving on to a different shot, I think my very favorite shot in this film is this one. For context, after his duel with Fade, Paul looks back at Chani, and obviously Timothée Chalamet's performance in this moment is astoundingly complex. He is not just looking back at Chani, his lover, he is looking back at what his life could have been. And there's a sense of despair in his face, but his eyes especially give us a sense of determination and acceptance of what he has become. And I think equally crucial to the performance is how Fraser and Villeneuve decide to light this shot. The super rich orange light from the sun acts as a backlight and casts him fully in shadow, almost silhouetted, but not quite. And this is a very clear visual sign of the dark path that he has fallen into. His face, like I said before, is almost completely obscured. The Paul Atreides that we have followed for the past 2 films is gone, and the light in his life, which was Chani, is fading along with the sun. There are countless other close-ups like this in the film, shots that convey concentrated, curated emotion through the best tool that we have to do so, which is the face. To list a few more shots, there's this incredible shot of Rebecca Ferguson's Lady Jessica, which does a similar thing to the shot of Paul that I showed, which is making her face engulfed in the shadow of her hood, which obviously displays her descent into this dark state of manipulation of Paul and the Fremen. But rather than analyzing every close-up in the franchise, I think it's more productive and applicable to think about Villeneuve's and Fraser's broader approach to shooting these films and how we can apply that to our own filmmaking. In a recent interview with The Times, Villeneuve said, and I quote, "I hate dialogue." Obviously, this was blown way out of proportion online, and I'm not here to cover that drama. But what Villeneuve was trying to say, and what he clarified in a later interview, was that he, as a filmmaker, tries to avoid the use of dialogue as much as possible. He treats it as a last resort, something to be used when the emotion or the complexity of the plot is too much to portray visually. If he can tell the story visually, he will do it, and that's what he was trying to say. And I think that this sentiment from him is especially unignorable in the Dune films. Villeneuve really pushes the limits of the audio-visual capabilities of film to a truly unmatched level, taking advantage of all the tools that film has to offer, including close-ups on faces. I want you to think about this for a second. In a theater, like a theater where you're seeing a play or a musical, you don't really have the option to zoom in on an actor's face. So the medium of theater calls for heavier dialogue and more extreme performances from the actors. And that's not better or worse than film, it's just the difference in the medium. But in a film, we have the power of the face, and we have the power of subtlety. We have that ability to be up close and personal, to observe and analyze and study a face. And the way that Villeneuve and Fraser and the whole cast and crew use this to their advantage is inspiring and incredible. The unique lighting opportunities of film, like silhouetting or backlighting or even blasting a whole bunch of light on an actor's face, that is all used perfectly in Dune. And performances by the actors are allowed to be subtle because Villeneuve is not afraid of the intimacy of a close-up. And with a budget of $200 million, which is a huge amount of money, obviously, you'd think that there'd be a natural inclination to show only the most grandiose, huge things. But Villeneuve knows what his story needs, and he knows how much emotion a face can portray. And that sort of brings me to my next point, which is the fact that I don't think this type of emotion could be conveyed without the cast that Dune has. These people, whether it be because of their experience in the film industry or experience in front of a camera, have an extreme sense of screen presence and comfortability that allows them to be as subtle and confident as they are. And by screen presence, I don't mean it's a conscious thing that we as the audience experience. More specifically, I mean that these actors, they work with the camera rather than trying to take over it because of ego or whatever. Denis Villeneuve didn't just choose Florence Pugh and Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya to be in his movie just because they're the most beautiful people in Hollywood. He chose them because they know how to be in front of a camera and how to direct and manipulate their own faces for emotional impact. And all of these elements, the proficiency of the actors and Villeneuve's love of the visual over dialogue, creates a sort of cinematic ideology that is not just applicable to the Dune films, but to all films. Films with budgets like Dune, and also smaller films with like one-person crews. It's the idea that the ability to manipulate an image and to microscopically tweak how a subject is framed is film's unique power to tell stories. With any camera, whether it be an iPhone or an Arri Alexa, we are able to paint with light and shadow and color. That is how we convey a human story. We are all able to be directors like Villeneuve or Sargent, but to get to their level is to develop a sensibility of how to uniquely and effectively convey emotion. We're able to paint our own portraits in every shot that we do. It's just all about intention. For me, watching Dune 2 was like a wake-up call to not be afraid of the close-up. As I've stated countless times in this video, Their simplicity is their power. And as I'm getting more experience in working on my own stuff and stuff for other people, I'm obviously becoming more aware of what I'm watching and how they do it. So seeing shots in Dune 2, a $200 million movie, that were basically just a face and a camera and some good lighting, was a really empowering experience as a filmmaker who has a camera and a face and lights, which are out of frame, but just trust me. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I was really wanting to share my experience of watching Dune Part 2, and I kind of wanted to share the inspiration I felt, and hopefully I did that effectively. But yeah, thanks for watching. Please subscribe. There's gonna be a lot more videos this summer. So yeah, goodbye.